Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast. I am Nick Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith.
And boy, do we have a big show for you guys today. I know I may say that in the past, but man, this is a giant show. This is one of those shows, Jared, where we did not expect to have this much news on today's date. We're actually moving our MLB preview to earlier next week just because we have so much going on, specifically in the National Football League. I think you guys know what we're going to talk about today. Lots of NFC East news, like I mentioned a little bit last week. I did not think it would be like this, though. I did not think it would be like this. Obviously, we will get into the Redskins and everything being going on with that organization, but a little bit later, we will get what surely will be a great rant from my boy Jared Smith on the Dak Prescott franchise tag debacle with the Cowboys. We will get into all the other players that were franchise tagged or signed long-term deals last Tuesday and Wednesday if we have the sufficient time. But we might not have the sufficient time because we have so much to dive into with the Washington Football Organization. Jared, I'm pretty sure I already said the R word on this podcast already. We were just joking about how everybody else has been making that mistake.
It's tough to not say it, so it's okay. It's understandable.
Yeah. I will say it one more time here. Obviously, the Washington Redskins they will not be called that anymore. That will be the last time we will at least try to use that name here on this podcast. Lots of scandal going on in the Washington organization. Not only the name change on July 3rd, but we also have these allegations from 15 former female employees and 2 journalists who were covering the Washington Football Organization that have said they were sexually harassed by team staffers while they were working for the organization. We have statements from Dan Snyder. We have statements from Ron Rivera and the NFL. Jared, when you heard all of this go down, when you heard the news about a Washington Post story about a scandal, did you think it was going to be something like this? What are your thoughts after now knowing that it's a sexual harassment story and that not only is there a debacle with the name going on in Washington, but there is so much more in the background?
Unfortunately, I did. That was my first thought. And I was curious as to how involved, if at all, Dan Snyder was involved. Now, seeing how he is the owner of the organization and the team as a whole, it starts with him, right? So even if he was not directly involved, even if he was not the one to harass any of these women who have come forth with these allegations, he is the one that he's the hammer. He's the one that's in charge, right? He is the one that can ultimately say, guys, this is not right. We will not have this in the workplace. And obviously there's still an investigation to go on, but for Snyder to, first of all, come out with his comments that he did earlier this morning, we're recording this on Friday, but also for him to, not know anything there's a very small chance of that, being that he is the owner, he is involved with every aspect of the organization, not just the players and not just the games on Sunday, but how things are run and the employees that are coming in and out of the office. So it's just, listen, the Redskins were already dealing with enough with this name change, right? And now having to come up with a new name and all of the hurdles that they will have to go through in order to get that new name. And now to add these allegations that are more serious than changing a nickname, this Redskins franchise they're on fire right now, right? It's not like their feet are being held above the fire. They're currently on fire right now. And I know you had a couple good thoughts as to some things that they can potentially do to disassociate themselves from that. And we will get into that a little bit later. I would say the word that comes to mind is disappointing, because there are things that can be done, protocols that can be put in place to where these situations do not happen. And if they are seen going on, they can be nipped in the bud immediately. But the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, I believe these allegations stretch all the way back to 2006. Is it 2006 or 2004? I forget. So it has been multiple years. And if I'm not mistaken, Dan Snyder also began owning this team in 2000. So for the majority of his tenure as owner of the Washington Redskins, these sexual harassments have been taking place. And it has taken 14 years for this to now be shed light on, and for a story to be written on it, and for this organization to come under fire. So disappointment is the word that comes to mind, because it should not have taken this long for these findings to come out.
Yeah, Jared, disappointing is the perfect word to use. Obviously, you never want to hear stories about this kind of stuff going on, but we have been hearing these stories in the last couple years, and people finally finding the right moment, specifically females finding the right moment to come out and discuss these things. Now, I'm personally glad that these 17 women have come out and said that this stuff was going on. Yeah, Dan Snyder's owned the team since 1999. These allegations have been going on for a very, very long time. And yeah, it's just disappointing. And what it seems like is when a guy like Dan Snyder comes out and makes a statement like he did today, which I'll read in a second, but it's been going on for so many years, it doesn't sound genuine to me, right? It doesn't sound like he's actually trying to make a change. It took him 20 years to change the name. It's now taken him essentially 15 years to change the culture. When is it time that it's enough for Dan Snyder? They need to change from Dan Snyder. He doesn't need to be the owner anymore. I don't know how the NFL could figure this out, but we've discussed this with other owners in other sports, leaving their posts because of just horrible management of their teams. I'm not even discussing the fact that the Redskins have been pretty terrible ever since he's been the owner. I don't really care about that as much. It's the culture problems. It's a bullying culture. That's what sexual harassment is. It's bullying, and you never want to see that. And then obviously there's the racial undertones of the nickname that he kept going up until, a couple of days ago. Right.
And let's also add really quickly that back in 2013, when Snyder was asked about a potential name change, he said, and I quote, "There will never be a name change." He basically said, "Book it. There will never be a name change." And it took money, right, and other partial owners to basically say, "We are going to pull our money," which would have been close to, if not 40% of the actual ownership that would have been pulled out from this team. So it took a potential loss of revenue, right, for Dan Snyder to actually take it seriously. It wasn't because truly in his heart he felt that the name should be removed. It came down to money. And that's not surprising coming from a multi-billionaire, and obviously his bottom line is what he worries about the most. But you go back to 2013 and it was a tweet, it was a report, it was reported that he said this would never happen, and here we are today, and the Redskins are no more.
Yeah, no, it's not good. Dan Snyder, he's been one of the worst owners in the NFL. As far as now, and what's funny is, doesn't it always seem to be the organizations, right, Jared, that we expect when this stuff goes down? Like the Clippers, for example, with Donald Sterling. They were awful for years and years and years, mismanaged. People didn't want to play for them. You didn't know why. Then you figured out Don Sterling is a raging racist. And you go, okay, that kind of makes sense. Dan Snyder, I don't want to change the name. Sexual harassment, right? All these teams, the team not playing good, and it happens, right? I wouldn't be surprised if there's something comes out with the Knicks or the Browns and all that. Like, it's always these organizations that you can kind of expect. And, it's just kind of sad to see that if you're a fan of this organization, what are you supposed to do, right? You didn't make the name of the team, right? You didn't pick this owner. This guy just sucks, right? You didn't sexually harass all the staffers. And so I kind of feel bad for the fans a lot of times in these scenarios where you didn't do anything wrong, but your team, your owner is just so bad, and it's just the culture is so bad, and you just want to watch your team win. And obviously, the Redskins have had bright years. RG3, Kirk Cousins had a couple years where they made the playoffs, but it's never been anything like really good ever since he's been owner, right, Jared? Like there's been nothing really to look forward to. So. Yeah, I just kind of, I get sad a lot for the fans in these organizations. And what's interesting is I didn't even think about this, but I'm wearing an old school Clippers jersey today just because I wanted to wear something, a white T-shirt today, and it just reminds me of how disappointed I was as a Clippers fan for all those years, how bad they were, and how excited I am for this year. So I hope the Redskins organization can move on from all of this stuff and can move on from a guy like Dan Snyder and just restart and become a real team again. And besides this joke of an organization, which they are right now.
Right. And you mentioned, it's kind of like you can kind of see it in light, obviously, with Donald Sterling and the Clippers. There was a history of mediocre play at best, right? The Clippers were not good. They had a few good seasons. You could say the same thing about the Redskins, but also I actually want to counter that in saying that there are many female reporters, women who have been beat writers for specific teams, more on a national level, in waves, who have come out and said this is not just an isolated incident. This is not just with the Washington Redskins. This is throughout the NFL as a whole. And they said that multiple women have come out and said that they will not be surprised if other teams get these allegations put upon them. So yes, while you can say, maybe you thought this could come up with the Redskins, this could just as easily come up with the Dallas Cowboys or the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Green Bay Packers, who have a history of success throughout their franchise's history. So it's in saying that, while maybe you're not wrong, we cannot sit here and say that this is just an isolated incident. And more than likely, unfortunately, this has happened in many other organizations and throughout the NFL currently. So this needs to be shed light on throughout the entire NFL, not just the Redskins, if it's in fact true that this is going on.
No, that's true, Jared. I actually love that too, because I urge the 31 other franchises in the NFL to look at what's been going on in their organizations, right? If there's one incident here and there, right, you're not looking at a culture thing, but I mean, if a team looks into it and goes, okay, well, what's been going on here? Have we, like, I would love if the NFL, all the other NFL teams looked into their organizations. I can remember, I don't want to call this person out, but I can remember, you remember Cam Newton's comments a couple years ago to a female reporter about her not knowing football and stuff like that, and why are you asking me those questions? Even in the last couple of years, we've seen these incidents live on TV where an NFL player is calling out a woman for not knowing football necessarily. And so I just think that, we want female employees in any workplace to be safe and to be respected. And it just seems like for some reason we still have a culture problem in this country where women just are not treated equal. And it's horrible to hear. And a lot of these allegations coming from 2014, 2015, 2016, like this is a couple years ago, right? When I was talking about, like, it's funny, you make a good point by saying sometimes a team is going good. The Redskins were pretty good those years when a lot of these allegations were coming down. These were the RG3, the Kirk Cousins years. So, it's just, there's a lot to unfold here. I do want to read Dan Snyder's statement real quick. I want to get your thoughts on it just after hearing it. Here are Dan Snyder's statements, the owner of the Washington franchise. And I quote, "The behavior described in Thursday's Washington Post article has no place in our franchise or society. This story has strengthened my commitment to setting a new culture and standard for our team, a process that began with the hiring of Coach Ron Rivera earlier this year." This is continued. "Beth Wilkinson and her firm are empowered to do a full, unbiased investigation and make any and all requisite recommendations. Upon completion of her work, we will institute new policies and procedures and strengthen our human resources infrastructure to not only avoid these issues in the future, but most importantly, create a team culture that is respectful and inclusive of all." So which ghostwriter wrote this statement for Dan Snyder, Jared? That's really the question I should ask for you. To me, that sounds like a whole lot of baloney and a whole lot of political talk and all that stuff. What's your thoughts on that statement?
Number one, nowhere in that statement did I hear an apology. Nowhere in that statement did I hear responsibility being taken for these actions. even though they are currently still allegations, right? As the owner, as the face of your franchise, as of that team, the multi-billion-dollar owner, there has to be accountability, and it starts at the top, right? So I did not hear an apology. I did not hear any type of responsibility being taken. And it's funny that he mentioned Ron Rivera in this statement, saying, one of the ways that we are going to, or that we are deciding to, move in a better direction is by hiring Ron Rivera. Dan Snyder did not hire Ron Rivera so that Ron Rivera could come in and help change the culture in this aspect, right?
Yeah.
He hired Rivera because he is a well-respected head football coach that knows how to win, that has taken a team to a Super Bowl, albeit in a loss, knows how to win. Now, Ron Rivera is also very respected. He's he was formerly in the military, has a very good background and upbringing, and is respected throughout the NFL. But for Snyder to basically insert Ron Rivera in as a reason to help change the culture in this aspect, that to me is so, I don't even have the right word for it. Basically trying to say it as in, oh yeah, well, we've known about these, particular allegations and the bad culture that's taken place. And one of the reasons why we brought Ron Rivera in is to help change that. He probably knew about these allegations and the things that were taking place, but it was not, bringing in Ron Rivera to help that. So I think that is just a lie in a sense. And it's almost tough to talk about because there's not much that can be done as far as him, not being the owner of this team, unless, and I may be mistaken, but unless the 31 other owners, along with the commissioner, in a sense, come together and vote Dan Snyder out, Dan Snyder's job is in a sense safe. He has to, in a sense, step down and resign on his own, which he's not going to do unless he sells the team and makes a massive profit off of it. So I think that is one of the most disturbing things about this. Is it's not like Dan Snyder can be fired, right, for his wrongdoings. It's he is the head man, like I've said multiple times, and he gets to stay the head man, right? Other people get to be fired for their misconduct and what they've said, but Snyder gets to stand up there in his, king's chair and continue to come out with these pathetic statements. And it's sad is what it is. It's sickening.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's sad too. And Ron Rivera in the NFL also made statements on these allegations, as you would expect. Ron Rivera mentioning even that his daughter works for the organization, and he's kind of sickened to hear that this stuff was going on. You can't blame Ron Rivera. How's he supposed to know this is going on? He's been the Carolina Panthers head coach for many, many years. You don't care about what's been going on in other organizations. So I feel bad for Ron Rivera. I feel bad for the players of the Washington Redskins. I mentioned the fans already. They're not doing any of this stuff, as at least as far as we know, right? And so, we watch football, Jared, to watch the football players and to watch, the crowds and all that stuff. And obviously, unfortunately, we might not have a crowd this year, but we don't watch the NFL because of the owners and the executives and all that stuff. So it's always disappointing to hear that an NFL team is being affected by these kind of bureaucrats up at the top that really don't even know anything about football in the first place most of the time. So, yeah, it's just sad. It's always disappointing to hear this kind of stuff with an NFL team. Any last comments on the Redskins? The Washington football franchise's scandal here, or do you want to move on to the name?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought up Ron Rivera's daughter and the fact that she does work within this organization, because I can guarantee no one is going to touch her. No one is going to harass her in any type of way, because that she has her dad on her side. And also, I think it's great that she's in the position she is within the organization, because hopefully other people, whether it's a male or a female, can now lean on Ron Rivera's daughter, to come to her with something. If they don't feel comfortable going to their boss or going to their superior, that they can go to Ron Rivera's daughter for advice or to say, hey, this is what's going on. I need your help, right? It seems like she can be, there not only to do her duties as her job title, but she can be there to basically help get that bad situation, that bad culture out of there. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is an important part, that Ron Rivera's daughter does work for the organization. And another point that I wanted to bring up, I feel that Snyder could learn from Mark Cuban, because if you remember back in 2018, Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks were having to deal with some of these same types of allegations, these sexual allegations towards women that worked for the team at the time. And Mark Cuban immediately came out, took responsibility, and apologized for what the team had done, even though it came out that Mark Cuban didn't have any direct contact, or wasn't directly involved in what was going on. At the end, like I said, he is the owner. He is the one that cuts the checks. He is the face of the franchise, and he immediately took responsibility for it. And that's exactly what Dan Snyder should have done. The fact that he has not done that, basically any of his statements that come out are null and void. I don't believe them. I don't trust them anymore. Mark Cuban also did donate, I believe it was $10 million to different specific women's organizations. Now, throwing money at something is not going to, make it go away. But like I said, at least Mark Cuban was able to instantly come out, and whether he really recognized it or not, he at least came out and took responsibility and accepted the blame for what's going on. We did not hear that from Dan Snyder. And like I said, going back to what I said in the beginning, that is the most disappointing part.
Yeah, I would never expect Dan Snyder to say anything even close to Mark Cuban either, because I would consider Mark Cuban to be a top 5, top 10 owner in the world, to be honest. He's one of the most ideal owners, a guy that's, the Mavericks have been a competitive team for how long, right, Jared? Like, if you're a fan of the Dallas Mavericks, almost every single year you can expect to make the playoffs because of the way that Mark Cuban runs that team. Obviously, we see Mark Cuban as just a very good guy in society as well. We see him on Shark Tank. So Mark Cuban, not surprised, makes the exact opposite decision that Dan Snyder did, because he's a good owner, right? And just last little comments here. I did find an article about how Dan Snyder can get pushed out of the owner's seat. There is a clause. Let me find this really quickly because I just scrolled up. There is a clause in the NFL's constitution. I'll just read it here. The commissioner of the NFL, which would be Roger Goodell, can determine if an owner or any other official has been or is guilty of conduct detrimental to the welfare of the league or professional football. Based on that determination, the commissioner can issue fines or, in extreme cases, push for a vote on whether to force the owner to sell. Real quick, all this information is coming from Fox Business, and it would take a 24 to 32 24 votes out of the 32 owners, so 75%, to get Dan Snyder out. So we will see.
Well, let's make that happen.
This is enough. And to be honest, Jared, right? It is. Right? It is enough. Right? You have rampant sexual harassment coming from 2006 to 2019. That sounds like fireable to me in any job. Right? Yeah, we'll see what the NFL does, and I think both of us can agree. We urge Roger Goodell to push that on the Washington franchise and Dan Snyder to get this fixed. And I'm sure that most of the players, fans, and coaches would gladly accept and push for that vote from all the other owners. So it'd be very interesting. All right, Jared, let's move on to the name change with this organization. Obviously, we had a hunch that this might be coming in the last couple of years. You did make the statement that Dan Snyder said in 2013 it would never happen, but I think with a lot of the racial incidents that have come on and just the general racial divide in this country, that the name of this team really was scrutinized. I remember watching certain ESPN shows where they would not mention this name. Certain people had tried to not mention this name as much as they possibly could because it does have racial connotations. What were your first thoughts on hearing that finally Washington was changing their name? This process had been going all the way back to, I guess, July 3rd and was announced this past Monday. What were your thoughts when you heard they were finally actually changing the name?
I'm glad that it's happening, but it is too late. let me take that back. I'm glad it's happening, but this should have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? It has taken a movement, right, by this country and basically the world to come together and recognize that on multiple platforms, whether it's racial, social injustice, there are that this name should not be a nickname of a Washington franchise or of any sports team in any league anywhere, right? And so, like I mentioned earlier, this comes down to money. And as long as Dan Snyder is the owner of this franchise, he will do what is best for his bottom line. And unfortunately for him, it took majority owners, to say we will push back if this nickname is not changed. And that is ultimately what moved Dan Snyder to make this change. And so to me, it's not something that is wholehearted. It is something that is money driven. And while I'm happy that this name will no longer be a part of the Washington organization, I'm not so sure that it is being done for the right reasons.
No, it's not. I mean, it isn't. We all know it's about money. FedEx specifically saying that they were going to take the name off the stadium, and I'm sure that no franchise no company was going to come in and put their name on that stadium, just due to the fact of the racial connotation and the fact that I think everyone knew that this was a bad name. I don't blame FedEx the last couple of years for having the name, because obviously, although sometimes for some reason in this culture we see something racial going on, but we kind of just look away, and as a society we don't kind of mention it, and then someone will bring it up to us and we go, oh, you're right, that's kind of ridiculous, right? So I don't blame FedEx or any of the other companies that had their name on the stadium before, but I think once FedEx, and yes, you said a lot of other major sponsors agreed this is not a good idea, we shouldn't be associated with this franchise, we shouldn't be associated with this owner, obviously it put pressure on him, and yes, due to money, he's going to change the name. I do ultimately think this is good, though. I just think the name is gone. It's kind of a cool thing too. We get to see a new name, a new franchise. It's like I remember the Winnipeg Jets changing their name and their hockey team recently from the Atlanta Thrashers to the Winnipeg Jets. They obviously changed cities, but that was pretty cool. It's like, oh, we have a new team, right? A new logo, all this stuff. Although it was an old logo recycled in the past, still the same thing. So I do think this is ultimately a good thing. And yeah, I do have a lot of ideas that I want to share as far as what I think this team can do. I personally don't know what the name should be, but based on what I'm going to say right now, I don't think it should have anything to do with the color red. And it's because I think that this team should just change their entire scheme, change the colors, change the jerseys. I know the stadium is built and the seats are red and gold, but figure it out. You got a year off with no fans, right? Let's figure out a way to pay the stadium. Plenty of stadiums have done it. It's not that big of a deal. But I think it should change the different colors that don't involve anything with the NFC East teams. So you'd be looking at no blue, no green, and no red, stuff like that, and just change it to something that's different, right? Change the name to something that's completely foreign, something that has to do with all the other teams. If you actually look at all the other teams in Washington right now, besides you have the Wizards, but their colors are red, white, and blue. You have the Nationals, and then you have the Capitals. Do something that's involved with politics, right? Like Washington, D.C., the reason it sits there is because it's the political epicenter of our country. So the Redskins were always an outlier as far as their name and their colors. So change to something maybe red, white, and blue, or something similar to that, right? Like just do something that is different than what you have now. Change the culture completely, so fans don't come in the stadium with that ridiculous logo and with the name and all that stuff. I know it's going to be hard for the first couple of years. I've already seen former players saying I will always be a Redskin, but you're going to have those people, of course, but eventually nobody will care in 10, 15 years, and we'll be calling the team the name. And again, it won't be that big of a deal. So Yeah, I think they should just change the colors, change the entire jersey scheme, and change the franchise completely. As far as get away from that name, get away from those colors, and just get away from it all.
I like the idea of the changing the colors completely, going in a different direction, because you're right. If the Washington franchise keeps those same colors, you're still going to have that remembrance of the Redskins, right? And what that name entails. And so if you change the entire color scheme, basically saying we're going in a different direction, in a different culture, just like their actual organization should be doing in the first place, I am all for that. Like you said, whether you want to do a different type of red and do a red, white, and blue, I can see that happening. Do you have and I'm sorry if you didn't mention, do you have a specific name in mind? Because I have two names that I feel would fit this team. There's a third name that I've heard mentioned, but I'm not so sure that I would like that associated with them. I'll just give my two first. The Warriors,
Go ahead.
the Washington Warriors, or the Washington Presidents. Now, Presidents might not sound as, I don't know, appealing or anything like that, but just like I said, they're in Washington D.C.
Yeah, you gotta do it.
Obviously, that's what. So I would say that the Warriors or the Presidents would be the two nicknames that I would choose for this team.
Yeah, I personally, Jared, I don't have a name because, again, I want the entire thing changed. So I think based maybe on the colors, you can do that. There's certain organizations out there in sports where the colors don't make sense to the name, right? Like the Lions being blue doesn't make a lot of sense because I've never seen a blue lion before. But right, that stuff could happen sometimes. But that's where it's hard for me to come up with a name. I did want to read off. So Yahoo Sports polled Washington fans, and these were some of the names that were voted. The top one was the Washington Red Tails, which I believe, Jared, has to do with the Tuskegee Airmen. If I'm correct about that.
In World War II, they were the first African American military aviators. I just quickly want to say that was the name that I was going to mention. That, in my opinion, the Washington franchise has no business using that name as their nickname. I don't feel that they deserve to use that nickname. That should be off limits for them, right? You have to, I feel like you have to deserve and earn the right to use that Red Tails name because of what it represents and what it means. And I don't feel like this Washington franchise has earned that right to say that name. So that should be out for me.
No, I agree with you on 2 points with that one. Obviously, I told you I want red taken out of the name pretty much. So obviously, Red Tails wouldn't make sense to me. I also think that would be almost, how we're looking at how he's the fact that he's changing the name overall looks like a money decision. Going full bore the other way with another, it's not a bad racial name, but with another racial name in a way would be kind of ridiculous to me. It would be something like, so you went from a racially insensitive name to a name that has to do with another race completely. I just think that's just not the way to go, and especially with Dan Snyder being your owner, it would kind of be backwards logic, right? It would. So I'm with you on that too. So here are the other names that were voted. The second one was the Washington Warriors in this poll. That was the second one. The Hogs was a name voted on. The Red Hawks, the Generals, and the Senators. The Senators, obviously, the former baseball team that played up into the 70s. And there was 20% other that was also voted. So there's plenty of other names out there that were voted on, but those were the ones that got the most percentage. So, we'll see if Dan Snyder even cares what the fans think, right? But there's a lot of interesting things. But personally, I don't have a name for this team just because I think they should figure out all the other stuff, come up with the name at the last second, right? Another one that has been thrown out there also is the Red Wolves, but like we've been talking about, we don't really want red in the name necessarily. So we will move on from that. Any last words about the name change? Any other opinions about the name change, Jared, before we move on to the Cowboys and Mr. Dak Prescott?
Let's rip that Band-Aid off. Let's go, man.
Yeah. So
And more so, I'm done talking about this Washington franchise. We have there is too much negativity and too much of a gray cloud hanging over that team right now, and things need to be fixed from the inside. But it is time to move on to another team in the NFC East. Even though it's not the best news, I would rather talk about that than have to continue to talk about all the negativity going on in that Washington team.
Yeah, I agree. But so yeah, we'll go from you discussing a rival to your favorite team, your personal favorite team, Jared, and that is the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, a lot of controversy coming out, a lot of different ways besides than the Redskins, but a lot of controversy coming out this Wednesday because Dak Prescott was indeed franchise tagged, and all these discussions about a contract going back to the beginning of last season, maybe even before that, has disappeared essentially. And now Dak Prescott will play on a $31.4 million exclusive franchise tag. He's only the third quarterback ever to play a season on a franchise tag. The other two being Kirk Cousins and Drew Brees. Kirk Cousins playing on that 2 times in 2016 and 2017. Real quick to mention, both those quarterbacks were not on those franchises the next season after that last franchise. So, Jared, obviously you're the Cowboys fan. I really want to get your opinion on this first. What's your thoughts on Dak Prescott playing on the franchise tag?
Yeah, it sucks is what it is, right? And more from a longevity standpoint, obviously Dak wanted to get a long-term deal done, and to an extent, we can say that the Dallas franchise and Jerry Jones wanted the deal done as well. From all the reports, it seemed like the Cowboys organization wanted Dak on a 5 or 6 year deal, more of a longer contract to where they could spread the majority of that money out in order to continue to pay, the rest of their players, because they do have major other contracts. They've paid Amari Cooper over $100 million. They paid DeMarcus Lawrence over $100 million. Ezekiel Elliott is over $100 million. So they do have other large contracts that they do have to keep in mind. And on the side of Dak Prescott and his team, he wanted at most a 4-year deal, right? He wanted a shorter contract to where he got more of his money up front, and that by the time he got into his 30s, he would be able to re-up and collect more money again on a second major contract. Not to say that I disagree with either side, but if you're the Dallas Cowboys, how do you not sign Dak Prescott to a long-term extension and risk losing him? When, let me mention, from the time that Troy Aikman left the Cowboys to when Tony Romo finally came in and actually became the starting quarterback in 2006, I'm going to list off some names of quarterbacks that the Dallas Cowboys had. Anthony Wright, Quincy Carter, Chad Hutchinson, Vinny Testaverde, Drew Henson, and Drew Bledsoe. Now, I'm going to take a leap out and say that you know who Drew Bledsoe is.
Yes.
And potentially Vinny Testaverde and some of those other quarterbacks. But were any of those guys, at the time that they played in Dallas, franchise quarterbacks? I'm going to answer that question for you. That would be a no. So Jerry Jones, in a sense, knows exactly what it's like to not have a franchise quarterback, have multiple down years, and be looking for that franchise guy. You have that in Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott is a model citizen. He's a leader. He has never been in trouble with the law, never caused any embarrassment to the organization. And I think one of the biggest things that I want to mention before I give you the reins is that back, I believe it was 2016, when Colin Kaepernick basically came out and started the entire kneeling for the national anthem, and all of that basically began. Jerry Jones came out immediately and said that no one within the organization, players, coaches, anyone that is involved with the Dallas Cowboys, would take a knee during the national anthem, that everyone would stand, right? What did Dak Prescott do? He stood with Jerry Jones and siding with him, right? When Dak Prescott, last time I checked, is an African-American, he's a black man, and I guarantee that he has many of the same values that Colin Kaepernick does. But what did he do? He pushed all of that aside, and he still took Jerry Jones' side, showed his true loyalty to not only Jerry Jones, but the Dallas Cowboys as a whole. and this is how the Dallas Cowboys are repaying him. Now, granted, yes, Dak Prescott will make $31.4 million, which is a huge chunk of change. And many people in this world would gladly accept that, right? But if you're the Cowboys, how do you not reward Dak Prescott's loyalty with a long-term contract? How do you not try to really come to some type of compromise, some type of agreement? To me, it's again, it's kind of pathetic that this organization, after going through so many years of not having a quarterback, finally getting one and still not recognizing it and still not giving him what Dak Prescott is worth. So, I mean, I will still continue to be a Cowboys fan, but if I'm Dak Prescott, I would not be surprised if after next year he hits free agency and he leaves. What loyalty does he have to the Cowboys anymore? To me, it's none. After everything he has showed them, and they have basically said, here's a franchise deal, but we're not willing to give you a long-term deal. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's so much wrong with this from the Cowboys standpoint. It's actually unreal for a franchise that's, cited as one of the best in the NFL to make this big of a mistake, in my opinion, is baffling. Two things about this. Obviously, you have the fact that Dak Prescott is a starting quarterback in the NFL and a top-tier starting quarterback. No, obviously, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Aaron Rodgers. But he's like a step below. Like it's not that far off. And yes, he doesn't deserve $45 million, but does he deserve more than Jared Goff? Yes, I'll just say that right now, 100%, at least equal to what Jared Goff did. Jared Goff at least got to a Super Bowl, right? So you could say that there's something he has on Dak there. But they're just, it's so ridiculous. And when you actually look at the money standpoint for this, because obviously the biggest issue with this was the length of the extension. And what I heard reported from Jane Slater, who is the top reporter for the Dallas Cowboys, was that at the last minute, the Cowboys offer was 33 to 35 million with 110 million guaranteed. Well, that sounds like, Jared, is also a 3-year contract. $35 million times 3 is 110 guaranteed. So even if they were going to sign him for 6 years, they were only guaranteeing 3. And I think Dak smartly with his owner saw right through that and said, no. I want more guaranteed like Patrick Mahomes. I want more money. Here's the problem with Dallas only offering a 3-year contract guaranteed. So he's getting paid $32 million or $31 million this year, right, on the franchise tag. You know what it's going to be next year? $38 million. So that's $70 million over 2 years. They were only going to sign him for 1 more year. Like, you realize, Dallas, that the salary cap is going to go up, right? And that, like, having Dak Prescott on a $35 million deal in 5 years is going to be a steal, right, for the type of quarterback that he's probably going to be. I expect Dak Prescott to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years if he remains with if he remains with the Cowboys, though. If he goes to some other organization that's not as good, I don't know, right? There's a lot of factors there. And if Dak does want, a ton of money and wants kind of that reparation for what happened, you never know. But I do think that Dak is a Super Bowl winning quarterback in the next 5 years if the talent around him is enough. And so for Dallas not to take advantage of a steal, remember we talked about Patrick Mahomes last week? There's going to be 1 year where he's getting paid $60 million, right? So there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. And the biggest thing that doesn't make sense is the fact that, yes, like you mentioned, you made a lot of good points. I didn't even think about the thing with Jerry Jones and the Kaepernick and the kneeling, which just boggles my mind too, that Jerry would be such a businessman in a sense and not be loyal to his guys. The fact that they've paid everybody else but Dak, disrespectful. The fact that Dak has, in some years, willed Dallas to be a better team than they were, right? This guy wasn't making the team worse. He was making the team better. Maybe he wasn't the end-all, be-all reason why the Cowboys were, a great team, but he definitely was one of the top 5, right? Like, he definitely is worth the money. And, it's just ridiculous, Jared. There's so much wrong with this, and it's baffling. But as a fan of an NFC team, I can't be too disappointed because it just looks like Dallas is going to lose their quarterback, right? It just looks like Dallas. So before real quick, because I'm going to turn this to you because I want to change this to another topic. There's been a lot of discussion. You mentioned that who were the Cowboys quarterbacks, right? You said Chad Hutchinson, Drew Bledsoe, Drew Henson, whoever the hell else you said.
I'm not going to say it again.
Kevin Cobb was probably in that mix as well, right? A bunch of no-name bad quarterbacks, and it's the reason the Cowboys haven't won a Super Bowl since the 80s. So, Jared, are you prepared?
90s.
Yeah, 90s. Jared, are you prepared as a Cowboys fan after this year, or maybe even next year, to have Andy Dalton possibly as your starting quarterback? Because that's been the rumor. What do you
no. You don't even need to finish your question.
What do you think about the fact that people are legitimately comparing Andy Dalton to Dak Prescott? Because personally, I think it's the most stupid, ridiculous comparison I have seen in NFL media in a long time.
It makes me want to throw up is what it is. No, it's ridiculous. First of all, if that situation came to fruition to where Dak Prescott did not sign a long-term extension and he became a free agent and left in free agency, the Cowboys would have to go out and get another quarterback. Andy Dalton would not be the long-term solution. Maybe he would be there for a year or potentially be there to groom whoever else they bring in, whether it's another young draft pick or someone off the street. But Andy Dalton is not the answer, right? Right now, they have a great situation on paper on their depth chart to where they have Dak Prescott as their starter. And I would say Andy Dalton can be a very good backup quarterback, right? I think he has proven that he is not a starter, not a guy that can lead a franchise to the playoffs and beyond. But as a backup, sure, I would love to have Andy Dalton as a backup, but that is about it. No way, if I am Jerry Jones, am I letting this go? And I think a lot of bad publicity has come out of this, right? And more so on the Cowboys franchise and on Jerry Jones' side. And we all know that Jerry does not like bad publicity. So maybe this does open his eyes to the fact that, hey, I do need to come back to Dak and his agent with a more legitimate offer, because at the end of the day, everything that this Cowboys franchise has built with drafting Ezekiel Elliott, having that really good offensive line, even though they may not be the best offensive line like they were 2 years ago, they are still very much formidable. They have a lot of young pieces on defense. This team is built to win right now. And if Dak Prescott is not on this team next year and the years going forward, everything that they have built will be for nothing, because I've said this before and I will continue to say this again. I don't care how you could have Deion Sanders, Jerry Rice, Lawrence Taylor, all the Hall of Famers on your team, but if you do not have a quarterback that can get you into the playoffs and win in the playoffs, it does not matter. Dak Prescott is a guy, like you mentioned, that I feel that in the next few years, as long as he continues to progress and continues to climb that ladder, can and will be a Super Bowl champion. And right now, Jerry Jones is basically saying, I am willing to let you walk and start over. Basically tearing down the entire foundation that they had built. One last thing. You know what it is? I think Jerry Jones just likes giving out more money. Because if we really think about it, if we go back to last offseason, if Dak Prescott would have signed a long-term deal at that point, you're right, it would have been in the low 30s. It would have been anywhere between $30 million to probably at most $33 million, but more than likely not even that, right? Fast forward to next offseason, when you're right, the salary cap will continue to go up. Patrick Mahomes got his deal. Russell Wilson is up for a deal soon. Deshaun Watson is going to want a new deal. Potentially, Lamar Jackson can be signed to a new deal. Dak Prescott can go from, waiting it out and potentially signing a deal for close to $30 million a year to potentially close to $40 million a year next year. So Jerry Jones apparently just wants to give Dak more money, right? That's the only conclusion I can come up with. Why would you have not signed him last year and saved yourself money? Jerry Jones just wants to dish out more money. That's the only thing I can think of, because, like I said, I really cannot see a scenario where Dak is not in a Cowboys uniform for at least the majority of his career, at least in his prime. To me, it would, like I said, it would tear down everything that this team has brought up. So if you're Dak, you play on this $31.4 million franchise tag this year. You do the best you can to get this team to the playoffs and into the Super Bowl. and you come back and you renegotiate and you ask for 40. And you go from there.
Well,
He's not asking for anything less. I guarantee you that.
No, true.
Settle. Not going to ask for anything less.
Here's the interesting thing, too. And one of the reasons I brought up Andy Dalton is because here you go, Jared. So now that please tell me if this is correct. Since Dak signed the franchise tag, they can't sign an extension until next year, right? Like they can't sign an extension.
They have to wait until after the season is finished.
Okay, so Dak is getting paid $31.4 million this year. Do you know who the free agent class of 2021 for the quarterbacks is? You want me to mention some of the names here on this list?
I'm not so sure. You're going to do it anyway, so just hit me.
Okay, so here are the quarterbacks that Dallas could get next year. Not a trade, but in free agency, if Dak Prescott decides to leave, right? They could get Andy Dalton, right? They could sign Andy Dalton, their backup. Maybe go after Phillip Rivers, right? Old school guy. Maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick. Jameis Winston is free. Let's see. Blaine Gabbert. Colt McCoy. Texas,
okay, you're
right?
done. We get the
Mitchell
point.
Trubisky. Mitchell Trubisky is on this list too.
That's a real upgrade.
Yeah. So do you see what I'm saying, Jared? Like, it doesn't make sense. Now, the crop of quarterbacks 2 years from now is potentially a little better, but there's a lot of rookie deal guys that like Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson that likely will be away, or Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, or Tom Brady. Go for those old school guys, in their 40s, right? But like the quarterback classes for the next 2 years are not good. Dak Prescott is better than every single one of them, or is not 40 years old, right? So like it just doesn't make sense. And you're right, Jared. Here's my perfect scenario, right? If I'm Dak Prescott, right? Imagine if the Cowboys win the Super Bowl this year, right? So he goes, oh wait a minute,
I can imagine that. Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes just won a Super Bowl and he got $45 million a year. Yeah, I might not be Patrick Mahomes, but yeah, I'm asking for 42. And then Dallas goes, like, there's no way we can sign him, right? He's not going to be on a franchise tag as a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So if Dak Prescott really wants 45 minutes, go out and win a Super Bowl. Just screw over the Cowboys. I know you obviously wouldn't want that, but like, imagine if that happened, right? Like you mentioned.
Oh no, I would want a Super Bowl. Yeah. I'll take a Super Bowl. Yeah.
Take a Super Bowl. Yeah. But then what's Jerry gonna do, right? Like, you're not gonna pay your Super Bowl winning quarterback, who's 26 years old, by the way, 26. He's not 36. He's 26. How old is Patrick Mahomes, by the way? Do we know how old Patrick Mahomes
24?
is? Let's see real quick.
I believe 24.
Google search. A little Google search here. Let me bring up the old Wikipedia on this.
This has been in the league going on 4 years.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is
to the league.
So it's 2 years younger than Dak. Like, is Dak now an old quarterback since he's 26? No, I mean, look at Tom Brady, Big Ben, and Drew Brees is still going at 40. It's like, it's so mind-boggling that they didn't pay him. It's ridiculous. One more thing I wanted to say, too. We won't be able to talk about these guys, but also, like, I mentioned that Kirk Cousins and Drew Brees were the only guys in the past to play on a franchise tag. What happened? Drew Brees left for the Saints and has been there ever since. The next year, Phillip Rivers became the quarterback of the Chargers. Not that bad for the Chargers organization, but obviously Drew Brees has been better than Phillip Rivers. And then obviously you have Kirk Cousins, who leaves the Redskins, and they haven't had anybody since. So what's going to Dak Prescott is so much better in the situation than those two too. It's like it just breeds Dak not being on the Cowboys next year. Here are the other guys, real quick. Here are the other guys that were franchise tagged on this day, the same way Dak was. AJ Green, probably not with Cincinnati much longer. Jacksonville's Yannick Ngakoue, he never wants to play for the Jaguars again, right? Guys like Hunter Henry, Bud Dupree, Leonard Williams, Anthony Harris, the safety from Minnesota, Shaquille Barrett, like a lot of these guys are maybe will not be on those teams next year. It's kind of like people don't necessarily care. With Dak, everyone wants him to still be on the Cowboys. So it's so backwards of thinking that that this guy is in the same list as all those other guys that probably won't be on those franchises any longer. It just doesn't make any sense.
Final word here. There's a reason why, and I'm glad that you brought it up, that there have only been 2 quarterbacks in NFL history that have ever played on a franchise tag. You want to know why? Because the majority of teams are smart enough to realize and understand when we have a franchise quarterback, we don't even have the thought of franchise tag in our heads. We take care of business beforehand, sign them to long-term contracts so that they are happy and they are staying with our franchise for years to come, which is what the Cowboys should have done last offseason. Because now Dak can come out and he will continue to say all the right things because, like I said, he is a leader, right? He is not one to, bash an organization or take the negative route, right? He will say the right things. But behind the scenes, whether he's talking to his family or even his brother that came out and mentioned, he said, I don't know how much longer I will be rooting for the Cowboys, right? If you're Dak, it is only human nature to feel slighted, to feel like, well, I've taken the team to the playoffs twice. Yes, I have not been to a Super Bowl, but in today's world, I deserve to be paid as one of the top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the league, right? There's multiple different things you could argue on that. But if you're Dak, you feel slighted. And like I said, there's a reason only 2 quarterbacks have ever played on the franchise tag, because it doesn't happen. Because franchises are smart enough to realize when they have something, when they have gold, and they lock it down and they don't even give an ounce of an inch of any other team the opportunity to come out and try to snag them away. And basically what Jerry Jones and the Cowboys just did was they opened that door, even if it's ever so slightly cracked, they opened that door a little bit for another team to potentially come in and steal away Dak Prescott and potentially steal away the Cowboys' future for the next 5 to 10 years of winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I agree, Jared. I mean, did you ever think Ryan Tannehill would get an extension over before Dak Prescott did? Like, it's so ridiculous. Like Nick Foles, do you ever think Nick Foles was going to get an extension before not an extension, but signing contract? I mean, wow.
You're just right now. What you're doing is you're rubbing salt on the wound. You're throwing daggers at my heart, and I don't really appreciate it. I don't think I've done anything to you this podcast that deserves that. So
here's the thing: if the Cardinals don't pay Kyler Murray in 2 years, give me the same crap, please.
Oh, noted. Noted.
Yeah.
I will remember this day, and I will come back to you.
Unreal.
I will be back.
Yeah, that's it for this podcast. Obviously, ton of NFL news. Like I mentioned, next week, Monday or Tuesday, we will be releasing the MLB preview for the season. Don't know how long the podcast will be, but we will just be discussing the 60-game season and what we think advantages are for certain teams and what we think disadvantages are, and predicting all the divisions and stuff like that, because the season does start next Thursday. It's less than a week away, so we will do that. And if there is more NFL news or more NBA news, we will dive into that in a podcast later next week if it is important enough. But yeah, next week we'll be doing our MLB preview for sure. That will get released Monday or Tuesday before the regular season starts for the MLB. But for this podcast, we are finished. There goes my timer real quick. Let me just cancel that. Knowing that the podcast needs to be over. But yeah, Jared, that's it. For me, Nick Nenad, it's been a fun podcast. And Jared, take it away.
All right, man. Well, yeah, that was good. I'm glad, like I said, we got a lot going on, a lot to discuss, a lot of it within the NFL, a lot of it within the NFL East. Hopefully there will be, like I said, final thing, I don't want to hear statements anymore from Dan Snyder. I want to see and positive steps to go in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction. So hopefully we will start to see those things in motion as this week continues and into next week. And hopefully the Cowboys get their heads out of their asses and they pay their franchise quarterback.
I agree.
And that's how we're finishing this show.
Hashtag fire Dan Snyder. Hashtag sign Dak Prescott.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's it. So this has been the Cover 2 podcast. I'm Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
We'll see you guys next week.
See you later.